What's up, Diablo 4 players? So these are the items that you want to save for maximum profit. These are some items that you want to make sure that you are saving to go ahead and trade with other players or go ahead and actually sell for gold. The reason why is because in Season 4, we are able to actually trade legendary items as well as uniques. Rare items actually have no place in the game. Now, for the sake of this video, I'm just showing off rare items here, and that is because if I add a legendary aspect, the text gets just kind of too long and it clutters the screen with unnecessary information. But in Season 4, the rare items actually have no place in terms of like picking them up. There's no point at all. Just consider these legendaries with any legendary aspect. Again, the reason why I'm showing you guys them in rare here is because it will just clutter the screen with just way too much text and it's unnecessary. So the reason why is because in Season 4, items that will drop as legendaries will have 3 stats, whereas rare items will only have 2. Technically, these items over here won't be able to exist. What they are is basically a 3-stat rare item. That does not exist in Diablo, but again, just reiterating that for the sake of clutter, we're gonna just look at the legendaries here as if they are legendary. But technically, again, it would have an aspect on it. So now that we got that out of the way, let's go over every single piece of slot, what you're looking for to actually roll. Now, as far as the endgame goes, even if you have all these affixes, it would considerably be the best in slot, but you do want to try to hit at least 1 out of the 3 to be a greater affix. If it is not a greater affix, for the most part, it really won't be the best in slot. Ideally, every single piece of gear that you have will all roll greater affixes, but that's unrealistic. Most people will get 1 or 2, and they'll pretty much have arguably the best in slot for 90% of the player base, I would say. To try to get a uber unique or any of these items with every single thing being greater affix, it's kind of asking for too much for most of the player base. So these are kind of what you're looking out for in terms of rolls. Remember, you actually only need 2 out of the 3 stats to roll because you can go to the occultist and actually re-roll one of the stats, but you cannot re-roll into a greater affix. But this is kind of what a lot of people are looking for on majority of pieces of gear. Now, again, there may be some sort of niche build like, oh, well, I'm playing Thorn, so then this may not apply. Sure, if you're playing a very, very niche build for like the 0.1%, then maybe it doesn't apply. But in most cases, this is for almost every single build. So starting right off, this is what a lot of people are looking for in the helm department. Again, your ideal goal is to get at least 1 out of these 3 to be greater affixes and to have at least 2 out of these 3 to exist because you can roll to make the other one. So starting off, in terms of the helmet, some of the niche things that you can get here that are very good is specifically getting cooldown reduction and fury per second. And on top of that, the other thing that you can get that a lot of people like to have is extra life as well as maximum resource. Those are 2 areas where you can get additional stats here. And keep in mind, I'm not going to cover temper in this video. I dedicated a video that goes over like kind of the best in slot for every single like temper for majority of the player base, but don't temper the items because once you start modding the item, you cannot trade it. So the whole point of this video is to save these items for trade. So again, you are really looking for maximum life, resource, cooldown reduction, and fury per second. Those are kind of like the go-to. Some of these may have more, and you can't just roll 4 of them on it, but, well, technically you can temper on the other stat, but again, we're looking at it for the item to actually drop. Now, as far as the chest piece, you can get additional fury per second, or mana per second, essence per second, you know, whatever class, you know, dependent resource it is. That is actually one of the more important stats in a lot of builds. Again, if you're playing a niche build that you're like, I play basic attacks only, well then don't get this, but you can still use it obviously to trade and it will still have some value. And then, depending on the class you play, some people may want armor, and on top of that, the extra bonus % armor could be okay as well. And then a lot of people usually like to have a bunch of resistances on the chest piece, because that's just a slot that you can kind of fill up. There's a lot of flexibility, honestly, in the chest piece. You can go for maximum life as well, but ideally, again, getting greater affixes on any of those would be ideal. Next up for the gloves. So the gloves are actually quite strict. You want to try to get crit strike chance, unless you're playing a damage over time build, and then you want to have attack speed. And then the last one is going to be ranks to whatever skill that you're playing. So it could be, you know, a build with, let's say, Frozen Orb, or that could be Twisting Blades. Doesn't matter, just that ranks to that specific skill. And ideally, one of the better stats, honestly, is going to be trying to get that crit strike chance as well as the ranks to that skill. The attack speed isn't necessarily as important, and that is because in Diablo 4 for Season 4, almost every single build can get maximum attack speed, which is plus another 100%, with the exception of a few things that do break the rule, like Accelerating Aspect can break the rule. There's a few items that break the rules of plus 100% bonus attack speed, giving you 200% attack speed in total. But for the most part, attack speed is one of the ones that will be best in slot, but there is some point where some players' builds will get so strong that they don't need any more additional attack speed, so you can just get like any other offensive stat is totally fine. As far as the pants go, you can actually get dodge in the pants department. That is a huge source of survivability. There is an exception. If you're playing a Thorns build or a build that needs to take damage to build something, then, of course, you don't need to get dodge. But that is a stat that a lot of players may actually forget about, is a huge amount of survivability. If you just dodge, you take no damage. So effectively, that is a huge amount of effective health pool. So getting dodge is very great. You can get maximum life, and if you are playing some sort of niche build, you can get ranks to a very specific skill. Back in season like 2 and 3, you can get like ranks to Ball Lightning, back when that was really popular, but it could be class dependent. That one's kind of a free open slot. But to keep it real with you guys, as far as pants goes, I want to say majority of endgame builds will probably end up using Tybalt anyways. Whereas with the Helm, arguably, getting the huge amount of extra resource and the generation per second can actually outclass the Harlequin Crest, depending on your build, especially even with the Necromancer, because you're not going to get some X multiplier on your minion damage, which is going to be one of the more important builds. But as far as the pants go, a lot of people will probably be looking at Tybalt for resource and a massive amount of extra damage. Now, moving into the boots category, the main thing that you really want on boots is pretty much that movement speed. There's also some defensive stats. You can look at main stat, but a lot of players, in terms of trade, just like any action RPG, the greater affix that you really want to try to hit on this is specifically movement speed. If you're interested in trading boots, that's going to be the stat that people are on the lookout for. But the rest of the stuff doesn't really matter too much. Boots is relatively flexible. But there are some builds you may want to have, like your evade cooldown actually gets reduced when you attack. If you're playing, let's say, the Frosty Strides build, that is going to be a very expensive thing to actually min-max. And if you do happen to have a greater affix, you can get millions or billions of gold for a really good boots that are for, again, Frosty Strides. And that is because, well, that is a top 0.1% build, and it's probably objectively the fastest and best build in the entire game. But it's not easy to play. And of course, the best players that are going to grind 30 hours a day will have billions of gold to give you for that godly pair of boots. Next up, in terms of weapons. So you'll see I put a lot of greater affixes here. So it doesn't really matter too much what you hit with the greater affix on the weapon. There are so many great stats. But looking at a two-hander, if you masterwork that thing and it's a greater affix, I mean, we're looking at getting plus 81% attack speed. That basically caps you out. If you have any more attack speed on maybe your glyphs or a Paragon board, or even any of the key passives, I mean, you're almost done right there with just that one thing alone. But attack speed is arguably one of the better things to go ahead and get on a weapon. And before, you weren't able to get plus maximum life, which is crazy that this beats out the base of the Grandfather, which is one of the uber uniques in terms of how much HP that you can get on a weapon now. And that's not even greater affix, which is crazy. Technically, yes, you can get a Grandfather with greater affix, but that's absolutely crazy if you're going to be looking for that. But ideally on weapons, again, maximum life is a newer stat that got added into the pool. Before, like, Doombringer was one of like the only huge defensive stat like weapons that you could add into the game, but now it's pretty solid overall. Now, as far as weapons go, also a lot of people may think, oh, just getting that flat damage is good. But the numbers that you get off of just plus % damage is all additive anyways. But some of the more niche ones, it could be some sort of condition like damage over time. These can actually be pretty good for some sort of niche role. You can also look at getting some extra chance to restore primary resource. This is big for any builds that have resource problems. And then on top of that, damage isn't necessarily a bad stat, because a lot of people just look at it and it's like something that everyone can use. So even if it rolls plus damage to greater affix, a lot of people will still buy those, but I'm going to be real with you guys. If if you're a top 1%er, a lot of people won't be really looking for that, but I still think that a lot of people will see that as like, wow, greater affix damage, it's good. I think that'll still be worth quite a bit of, gold or currency or whatever people decide to actually trade it for on websites. And we'll talk maybe about like how to trade too. I actually will link a video down below in case any of you guys want to learn how to trade in the game. You could sit there spamming in town, but that's terrible. That's like way outdated. There's websites nowadays for it. Wish they would build it into the game, but nonetheless. On top of that, two-handers can roll a very specific thing that is absolutely crazy. Look at this two-hander over here with a masterworked greater affix. Resource cost reduction, giving 63.4% on a two-hander is crazy levels of resource cost reduction. And before, you'd almost always want that in your amulet. Depending on the build that you play, you may actually want to spend a certain amount. Like for Barbarian, it's like every 100 resource you spend, you get the Dust Devil, or every X amount you can use Banished Lord's Talisman, right? So keep in mind, it might not be for every single build, but majority of builds will want some sort of resource cost reduction in their build, and this is huge that you can get that amount. I mean, look at that chance to restore up to 40% of your resource. I mean, that is crazy amounts. Again, getting some sort of like niche one, it could be damage over time, or a lot of things can be tempered on, like, you know, the damage while berserking and stuff like that. But if you're looking for like the bonuses to like double skill activation, like the frozen orb activating twice, or, you know, rapid fire basically activating twice, those are all on the tempered mods. Again, you don't want to start crafting on the item because once you do that, it's not going to be tradable. So as far as weapons go, that's kind of like the ideal go-to thing. I think most people will probably want main stat, attack speed, and maximum life. That's kind of like the core stuff that people will be wanting. And as far as it goes, you can hit on greater affix on like any of them, and people will be excited about that. But that resource cost reduction one could be pretty key for certain builds if they are maybe like Barbarian specifically, because that's really good for specific builds. Although most will want to spend resource, but again, there's always players playing lots of different things in every season. So the next part is the amulet. So as far as the jewelry goes, so on the amulet, if we hit one of the greater affixes that we could choose, usually in most circumstances, it would be crit strike chance and cooldown reduction. Those are the two stats that you really want to see on an amulet. Now, before, you would normally want movement speed in the amulet department, but now you can actually temper that on. Now, keep in mind, I just showed this as an example, as well as resource cost reduction. You could temper both of those stats on, so it just needs to have 2 out of the 3. So, again, movement speed, you're not going to want it to drop with movement speed, because, again, most people will just temper that on, and you'll get, most of the time, you will be able to get movement speed pretty easily with this, especially because you can also throw an aspect that will give you additional movement speed as well. And what you want on the amulet in most builds, unless it's, of course, a damage over time, crit strike chance is kind of what you're looking for, again, in cooldown reduction, and then ranks to whatever skill or build that you are playing in the amulet department is going to be a pretty nice stat to have. So again, cooldown reduction, crit, if you can get greater affix, that's great. Some of these numbers, by the way, the reason why I'm showing you the high numbers is to show you guys at the end game, and we're looking at like the best of the best to be able to trade with, you know, players. It's not going to start off as this, just as a heads up. You're going to have to obviously masterwork it, and you do need it to be greater affix if you actually want to trade, because most people will not be trading for things that aren't greater affix. Again, we're talking about endgame. Most people don't even engage at all in trading before you even, get to the endgame. No one's really trading the like lower tier gear. There may be some exception for certain uniques, but again, you definitely want to get that crit strike chance and cooldown reduction. It's really big. But there are other things like, again, movement speed. There's like resistances as well for maybe like more niche things. But just try to get that cooldown reduction and crit. That would be like the ideal slot. And the other one, it's so build dependent, and rolling nightmares is a nightmare in Diablo 4. If anyone has played the game, you know that the amount of stats that can roll on an amulet, because you have like, 20, 30 passives to go ahead and go through, it is really hard. So this is probably going to be one of the most expensive things in the entire game, is a good amulet with specifically crit and cooldown. And again, you may be able to get like some other stats on it, but for the most part, those are the two main ones. Now, moving on to the rings. There's actually a lot of flexibility with the ring slot. So a lot of builds can revolve around lucky hit chance. And there is a brand new one that is really good, and this will save you an aspect, and it can actually save even a glyph or even something on your skill tree, because you need some source of vulnerability to do good damage in Diablo, right? But now there is a roll, and it seems like it's a very hard roll. When I was playing on the PTR, this thing did not drop. So I don't know if like that specific lucky hit chance to apply vulnerability is just like a very low, what's called a weight in the game. But that specific stat, if you can get a greater affix, man, you can solve so many things in builds. So what it does, it's a lucky hit chance to just make enemies vulnerable. Now I know that there's also a aspect that you can put on, but why use a whole aspect slot, which can give you, way more multiplicative damage, when you could just throw it on just one out of the 3 affixes on an item. And then crit strike chance is really good on rings as well. And obviously lucky hit is good. So all those would be greater affixes. There's not actually one that's like, oh, you definitely want to hit those. I mean, ideally you get everything, but that's unrealistic. Other things that can be really good over here is resource cost reduction. You can get maximum life, but a lot of the resource stuff can be solved in other areas in the game, so it's not really that important. Now, there is certain builds that can revolve around certain things like crit strike damage. Like, for example, in the rogue, there's like some sort of key passive, and it depends on the class that you're playing, but there could be one where like, oh, it gets more bonus stats off of, let's say, your crowd control bonus, or this one is your crit strike damage bonus. This one over here is based off of your damage versus vulnerable enemies. So there are some sort of conditional stats for very specific builds. Again, the more niche that you get, the prices of certain things can go way through the roof because there's not that many people picking up those items, and they are best in slot, but it's for like a person that's playing a very specific build and wants that number to be very high. But in most cases, look at the top ring over here, lucky hit. The vulnerable is actually a really great stat, but I think the most important stat that people will be on the lookout for specifically rings is crit. Like, if I had to pick one thing on the ring, because there is a lot of flexibility depending on builds, that's what I would shoot for. But again, those are the items that you want to save to make a huge profit in the game. So hopefully this guide and video helped you guys out, and I'll also link a video down below that goes over all the tempers that you want to try to hit on the item. Remember, you don't want to start tempering and masterworking the item until that's your item. Don't try to modify the item before you trade it. Don't go to the occultist and think, well, I've got like, maximum resource, cooldown reduction, I need to hit that free per second. Don't roll it, because once you roll it or modify the item, it does become untradeable in most cases in a lot of different video games. It doesn't just apply with Diablo. So don't modify your item if you want to trade it, but pick those items up. That's how you're going to be getting super, super rich in the game. And that, guys, is going to be wrapping things up. If there are any other niche things that you guys felt like I missed out on, definitely let me know in the comment section below, and maybe I'll save it for you. And I play this game 30 hours a day, honestly, on my Twitch stream. So if there's any sort of niche things that you guys are looking for, let me know down below. And after I min-max my character, like I have best in slot everything, I'll hook you guys up with the items, no strings attached, just like I normally would back when we were playing. And now I can give you guys the unique items, because I know for some of you guys are like, oh my gosh, I need that Tempest Roar, or I need that unique. And if I have extras after I'm finished with my build, you guys can have them, no gold, no strings attached. Anyways, that's going to wrap things up. If you guys enjoyed the video, drop a like on it. If you're new here, hit subscribe, turn on that bell so you don't miss out. And I'll see you guys in Season 4. Man, I'm so excited about it. It's going to be a great season. Peace out, though, guys.